What's up guys, John Bird III here, and we're back again for another video. And in today's video, I had this idea. We're gonna talk about how to pick the right jig rod based on the jig that you will be throwing. I think this concept often gets misconstrued. We tend to glaze over it. We don't really talk about it. We just say, oh, I need a good jig rod. Well, it's not just that simple. But before we get into this video, if you're new to this channel, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Also, make sure you hit that notification bell. That way you can be notified whenever a new video drops and hits the channel. So I'm getting ready to start practice for this tournament, and that's coming up later this fall, and I want to go get a lay of the land. And I know a jig works on that particular lake, but I thought about it. I was like, man, not all jig rods are equal. So we're gonna do a deep dive into that today. There's one particular jig and the setup for it that I won't go too in depth with, but I will tell you what you need because I don't really throw those jigs a whole lot, but we'll get into it. So first jig I want to start talking about is, I guess, your overall jig style. Now I have a bunch of different jigs. If you like throwing a jig, like, there are tons of jigs. So some people tie their own. Strike King has them. There are just so many different jig companies out there, and they all are unique. But I'm gonna talk about a good general purpose jig, and we're gonna go from different gauge of wire hooks, which is important because that helps determine the rod for that. And I'm going to show you what rod I recommend for that particular jig. Give you a couple different options. So to start off, I want to start off with a great all-around jig that just freaking catches them. And all the Strike King guys know about it. I mean, it's a killer jig, and that's the Denny Browse structure jig, right? But in particular, just look at this hook. So it's a more of a shorter shank hook, but it also has, I would say that's like a general purpose hook. It's not overly stout, but it's just right. So with this particular jig here, you can pretty much get away with a couple different jig rod options. One rod I highly recommend for this jig, because it's just a great all-around jig, is any type of 7'3" medium heavy power fast action. In particular, so this rod I have right here is the Team Lose Elite Series rod. So it's a 7'3" medium heavy fast. This is a great all-around jig rod. It has plenty of backbone, but it also has very good tip. And so it would allow you to be able to skip that jig under a dock or whatever. And it actually has a little bit more oomph to it, in my opinion, than your standard medium heavy, but I just like that rod, and I think it's perfect. Great sensitivity, but it's not necessarily about this specific rod, but as long as you have some form of medium heavy power, fast action, that is a great standard to start with a jig. Now, when you start getting into more heavier gauge wire jigs, I don't recommend that, or with lighter wire jigs, I don't necessarily recommend it in particular unless it has a really, really soft tip. So that's one option right there. So let's say finesse jigs, right? Finesse jigs, I feel like, have their place. A lot of people like to downsize in the fall and in the winter, but I feel like a finesse jig is always a great jig that you can use just to get bit, right? So I have two options in that in particular. One is a football jig, and I mean, I'm gonna just be honest. If you see my jig box, this is jigs, traditional jigs, football jigs. I don't think I got football jigs in here because I ain't got my football jig box. It's in my box, but I got one over there. But traditional jigs, bladed jigs, all of that stuff, except my football jigs. But anyway, so I have a finesse football jig. I think I have one in here, and if I don't, I do have another finesse jig option. So here is a finesse jig right here. It's not a finesse football jig, but it's just a small little finesse jig, right? And if you look at this little old itty bitty hook, super light wire, you can't use a big rod for this. This sucker will probably mess around and open this sucker wide open, and you don't want that. So great option for that. The jig rod that I'm going to recommend, I'm not going to really talk a whole lot about reels in this particular video because it's more so about the rods, right? So a great rod in particular, y'all have heard me, I say if you only had to have one loose rod, it would be the Magnum hammer. So 7'3", well, more so power. So medium heavy power, but this has a mod fast action. So the Magnum hammer, but in particular, this is the Mark Zona light jig ultra rod, but it's still just like the Magnum hammer 7.3 medium heavy mod fast. But with the mod fast, it gives a little bit more deeper into the blank. And with that actually gives you the opportunity not to open up that hook. So because it gives you a little bit more play. So the rod still has good backbone, but when you go into a lighter wire hook, you need to have play. Because if you go straight to a broomstick with that sucker there, just know it ain't gonna be no hook no more. That sucker gonna be straight wide open. So that is 2 jigs right there and 2 different rods that'll get you started. So think about it. If you're going to throw a finesse jig, you need a rod that has some backbone, but you definitely need a softer tip with it because, again, the more backbone that rod has, the more likely you're going to open up that hook. And you don't want that. So another jig option, we're going to talk about a football jig because I just remember, I feel like I have one over here somewhere. I got tackled everywhere and I don't know what I specifically did with that jig. All right, so I just went and pulled one off the wall because I knew I had some. So here is a football jig. In particular, this is the J. Lee combat jig. So I want to open this one up. So with a football jig, I don't know how many football jigs that have a really beefy hook, but they have I want to say it's a little bit thicker than a light wire, but it's still not a standard jig hook. So if you look here, see, it's still a lighter wire hook, but it's not like super light wire. So in this particular instance, you have to think about it like this. If you go with a softer rod with a football jig that has a lighter hook, when you go to set that hook, especially a long ways out there when you bombing a football jig, you need a rod that has a little bit more oomph because of distance. The oomph isn't for hook setting power, more so because the gauge of the hook is too thick. It is to drive the hook home at a further distance. So a great option for that is, and this rod right here is a sleeper. A lot of guys don't talk about it, but more importantly, you need a medium heavy power fast action. And in particular, especially with a football jig, you want a longer rod. So this is in particular, it's a 7'6" medium heavy power fast action Mark Rose swim bait rod. So this rod has great tip to it, but it has plenty of backbone to drive that hook home. So this rod isn't overly powered, it's just right. It has a great backbone, a crisp action, and when you make that long bomb cast out there, you'll be able to reel that slack in. I mean, just crack them, and you don't have to worry about opening up the hook on this jig here. Because again, you have to think about it. You have to think about the scenario. If you're up close and personal, big beefy hook, you're gonna need a rod that's perfect for that. But if you got a, let's say, standard size hook or a standard gauge hook, and you're making a longer cast, you're definitely gonna need a rod that has a little bit more backbone to be able to drive the hook home at a further distance. So if you got live scope on your boat and you're making a long cast, let's say you're at 100 feet away, 120 feet away, and the only reason you know that you can see it based on your live scope, you see your bait hit the water and drop down. Well, when you set that hook way out there, you got to think fluorocarbon doesn't have a lot of stretch, but it still has some stretch. So you need a rod that got some length, because the longer the rod with a longer cast, you're able to take up more line with the hook set, but you're also reeling in that slack as well. So you got to be able to play with that and have all those certain, I guess you want to call them variables, taken care of in order for you to be able to penetrate that hook into the fish's mouth way out deep and to be able to get them in the boat. So that's most important. So you definitely gonna need a long rod. So 7'6", 7'4", 7'6", but I think 7'6" is more optimal. And sometimes I keep this in mind also. Sometimes some 7'6" rods just feel very like imbalanced, heavy in hand, and this rod feels great. Another great option, 7'6", medium heavy power, fast action, custom light rod. That rod is amazing. So, but then this rod also works well for a good swim worm. So I'm gonna throw that little tip out there anyway. But anyway, all right, so that's 3 options. So you got your finesse jig option, which is like a 7'3" medium heavy mod fast action. You got your standard option, a 7'3" medium heavy fast action, just general purpose. And then you got your football jig, long cast, long bottom cast way out there, 7'6", medium heavy power, fast action. All right, now we're gonna go to more so, let's say like a flipping style jig, like not up close and personal, or let's just say dot skipping, right? So the jig wire is still not too heavy, but I guess you can call it, let's say it's maybe a little more general purpose still, but you need that extra oomph to be able to drive that hook home. Two different jigs, but you see the gauge of the wire of the hooks are a little bit different. They have a little bit more oomph to them, right? So in this particular option here, I want to give you two options just for dot skipping purposes, because with dot skipping, I feel like you need a very specific rod. First option I recommend, Andy Montgomery 6'9", heavy power, fast action skipping rod. Best dot skipping rod out there, period. And if you don't like a 6'9", they got the 7'1". The 7'1" is more so like a medium heavy plus. So that's a great option as well. But I like the 6'9". I feel like I'm more accurate. And it's not because of my height, because I'm 5'5", because I typically like longer rods. I can skip just fine with a 7'3". But with the 6'9" skipping docks, it just works out so perfect. I tried the 7'1", was good with the 7'1", but I was like, let me try the 6'9". Tried the 6'9". The 6'9" at first was very, how can I explain this? It felt awkward because I'm so used to a longer rod, and I think my mechanics are used to the longer rod. So when I got to the shorter rod, it just felt off. So when I tweaked my mechanics and I got my mechanics in order and switched to the 6'9", perfect. It was like dead shot. So I'm able to get it in a tight little quarter. So 6'9", heavy power, fast action, or if you like the 7'1", the 7'1" heavy power, fast action, that works as well. So those two rods are very specific rods that I definitely recommend that you go ahead and get. The other couple ones I mentioned, you can just, as long as you got the right power and the right action, you'll be good. But that specific rod, the 6'9" heavy and the 7'1", perfect, because this is the Andy Montgomery skipping jig right here. And like I just said, with it having a thicker gauge hook to it, you definitely need the backbone to be able to drive the hook home and pin that fish right in the roof of their mouth, dead center in the nose, cross their eyes, as I like to say. You definitely need the right rod for that. But keep this in mind as well. It's not about just driving the hook home with a jig that has, let's say, it has a thicker gauge hook to it. It's about not only driving the hook home and pinning them right between the nose, but it's also about getting that sucker from across that dock post. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, some docks got them cross beams on them and all of that. So you need that rod to be able to reel down to them and crack them and pull them suckers straight up out of whatever that particular cover is. So definitely want the 6'9" heavy or the 7'1" heavy. In particular, Andy Montgomery uses the 7'1" the most over the 6'9", and he's 6'4". But again, I can use the 7'1" be just fine, but I like the 6'9". Now, at first, I loved the 6'1". I mean, the 7'1", I thought it was perfect. But when I switched to the 6'9", adjusted my mechanics, got my mechanics straight, it was just lights out. So that was that. Now we're going to talk about beefier gauge wire hooks. And I have one in particular. And I don't know if you guys ever used these jigs. This jig right here is a Toad Thumper Juggernaut jig. All right, so you see the jig, but look at this freaking hook on this sucker. I tell my buddies about this all the time. Look at that thing right there. That sucker is a freaking tuna gaff. Like, it is a beast of a hook. This hook here, and this particular jig here, if you're gonna use this jig in particular, or a jig that has this thick of a gauge hook on there, you need a rod. Because, I mean, I can see me, I flip this around on Santee, heavier cover type stuff. Now, this is only a 3/8, but I have 1/2 ounces as well. So when you're flipping this around like stumps, cypress trees, and stuff like that, heavier cover, and you're trying to target those bigger bites, you need the right rod. So my rod recommendation is, or let's say power. So I recommend a 7'4" heavy power, fast action. In particular, this is my flipping stick. Y'all see me use this in my sight fishing tournament on Lake Murray. This is the Custom Pro 7'4" heavy power, fast action. It's also labeled the pitching stick. The pitching stick is also in the Lose custom light lineup. It's a 7.4 heavy power fast action, and they're in some other series. There's in the Elite series, the 7.4 heavy fast. All the power and the actions are the same. It's just at different price points. So depending on your price point, you can get them in the Elite. You can get them custom pros if you can find them still in stock. Definitely recommend a custom pro if you especially if you like the cork. But this is a good particular option here. Also in the custom lights is more so that mid-range price point. 179, 169, somewhere like that. 7.4 heavy is great there. And I don't think that rod is in that model is in any other rod series in a Lose lineup. It's not in the TP2s, but if it was, I would definitely say you get that. Oh, there's one in the KVD lineup. So I think those are like 129. So definitely want to check those out, the new KVD Elite rods. But you need a rod that when you lay into them, like you instantly move them, but you got to have that backbone, because regardless of the hook and how whatever the gauge wire is, I reel down and I crack them. But with this hook here, like, you need a rod. You don't need a pool cue, but you need a rod that got that oomph to it. And that is why in particular I recommend that 7.4 heavy. I don't think you don't want to use this on a medium heavy mod fast. Could you get away with a medium heavy fast on this with this jig? You can get away with it, but what I'm learning, especially with big fish, when it comes to big fish and you got a beefy hook like that, depending on how that jig hooks them in the mouth, and if you hook them in that hard area, especially like right there across their eyes, this hook takes a lot more power to really like just lean into them. And I know I haven't talked about line size with this, but this is, for majority of my jigs, I throw 20. The only jig I don't throw 20 on will probably be this little Finesse jig. I may drop down to like 17. I don't use 15-pound line. And then I only use 12-pound for cranking and stuff like that. 17 for everything else. And then for flipping and jigs, I use 20. But with that Finesse jig, I'll probably go 17. But here you're talking 20-pound line, right? Big line, big rod, and you really gotta just crack them. And like I said, when you hit them in that hard roof part right there, like, you really need a rod that got plenty of backbone to drive this hook home. Now, if you went up to a 7.6 heavy, you'll be just fine. Again, 7.6 heavy will work with this particular jig here, especially with this Gage hook. Even if it's not this jig, but a jig that has this type of hook, 7.6 heavy would be fine. But you need that length, because again, length allows you to take up more line, as well as even one, and then you got the power of the rod, and you got the right tip action, so fast action. So that's what I recommend. So you definitely gonna need a bigger rod there. So 2 honorable mention rods I want to recommend here, and one rod that I use it a lot is the LFS rod. It's a 7.3 heavy fast, but it's more so like a mod fast. So if you use the Mark Rose jig worm rod, right, that's the other honorable mention. These are close. The Mark Rose jig worm rod is 7.2 heavy mod fast. Love that power, love that action. It's a great rod. But I wanted a 7.3. Lose used to make a old football jig rod, and I have 2 of the older models. They 7.3 heavy mod fast. I'm trying to, if I have a discontinued rod that I like to talk about, I try to put you on game with current model rods that fish very similar, because you're not going to be able to get your hands on those unless you find them at some old tackle shop or a bargain bin somewhere and they got them. And if you find them, like, buy them just like that. Like, don't wait, don't hesitate, go get them. So this rod right here is 7.3 heavy power fast action in the LFS rod, but its fish is very similar to my football jig rods, which are again 7.3 heavy power mod fast action. And these are do all jig rods. I can pretty much do everything. I don't recommend the Finesse jig. I could get away with this big tuna gaff, maybe, because of the backbone. But I really know I gotta really lay the wood to him with that jig. But I said I got a hard hook set, so I'll be able to get away with this rod. But you definitely want to check this rod out. Like, if I had to pick one rod, and that's tough because, like, all of these rods have their specific purpose, and y'all know how I am. I like to get very dialed in. If I had to pick one, I'm probably going to go with this one right here, the LFS rod 7.3 heavy power fast action, or my football jig rod again. It has this rod, the LFS series have a little bit softer tip, but again, great rod. So if I had to pick one, it would probably be this or the Mark Rose jig worm rod 7.2 heavy mod fast. The other rod that I want to talk about, Castle 9 talked about this in his video about flipping grass and punching grass. And when you're using a big 1 ounce jig, the hack attack jigs, stuff like that, the rod I'm going to recommend for that, it's going to be, I'm going to give you two options, depending on what you like. Either the 7.6 heavy power super duty rod or the 7.11 heavy power. Both of them are fast action super duty rods. So either one of those, depending on what you like. If you like a long rod like a 7.11, that'd be great, depending on how thick the grass is. Because when you punching that grass and you flipping that grass, you need that longer rod. So a 7.11, I definitely recommend 7.10, 7.11 heavy power. Even if it's a mod fast, that's actually pretty good, because anytime you're punching, and you have, or using the jig too, whether it's like a big weight, just texture rig, or using a jig, or with the little the slither rig, anything like that, you have to be careful when you try to set that hook, because that big jig or that big weight come flying out of that grass if you ain't got a fish, and it could mess you up. So having when you're fishing braid, because that's when you grass, you're gonna talk about braid. So you're talking about big rod. So you got heavy power, 7.10, 7.11, and you got 50, 65 pound braid, right? No stretch. Having a mod fast action gives you the option to be able to, when you set the hook, or just, you're not really leaning down and cracking them, you kind of just pulling into them. That mod fast action gives you a little bit extra play that you need, because when you have zero stretch and all of that, all you're literally doing, you just pulling into them, and it's pulling that jig hook, or that flipping, that jungle flipper hook, or whatever your flipper hook is, it's pulling it into their mouth, especially with a snail knot whenever you're using like a texture rig style or whatever. But that's another honorable mention. So if you're puncher grass, 7.10, 7.11 heavy power mod fast action, or you use the 7.6 heavy power fast action, those are great options. So those are my jig rods for the different types of jigs based on their gauge wire of the hook. Again, just to kind of run this back, to sum it up, finesse jigs. Again, we're using a finesse jig like this. You want a medium heavy power, mod fast action. That is going to be perfect. When you go up to your standard size jigs like the Denny Brown structure jig, you're going to want a medium heavy power fast action. I typically like a 7.3. When you start talking about a football jig, long cast out there, you're going to want a 7'6" medium heavy power fast action, right? When you start skipping docks and your jig wire hook has a little bit more oomph to it, you want to go to like I said, I used the 6.9 heavy power fast action Andy Montgomery skipping jig rod, or the 7.1, either one. So that's a great option. And then when you start talking about big daddy hooks, like this tuna gaff on this particular jig here, you want a 7.4, 7.6 heavy power fast action. And then of course, when you're talking about 1 ounce jigs with bigger hooks like that, 7.10, 7.11 heavy power mod fast action, that is what I recommend. That's just a quick rundown. And again, great honorable mention rod. I'm gonna mention this one more time. Team Lou's LFS series 7.3 heavy power fast action. That is the rod you need to do literally pretty much everything, with the exception of punching grass and finesse jigs. This rod will definitely get you by. So that's it for today's video. If you like this type of content, make sure you leave a comment down below. Make sure you hit that like button and share this video. I'm JB3. I got to get back to living a dream. I'll catch you later.